Jamie, do you ever have people leave St. James Orthodox Church in Beaufort, South Carolina?
Sometimes we do, every now and then.
Sometimes you do. Do they sometimes leave for theological reasons?
Rarely, but they do sometimes.
Okay. Um, do they sometimes leave for other reasons?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We're in the same boat here at the old Westway in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. So, so I thought we could talk more about that. Like preface this with uh, James and I had a conversation, a very similar conversation to this about 3 weeks ago, and like I kind of left that conversation, I don't know, feeling a little bit unsettled. Just like I didn't like the fact that we didn't talk about the difference between those two things. We kind of just like lumped everyone into this. I felt, I don't think you felt this way, but I felt we could kind of lumped everyone into the same category. And like, I don't know. I don't think that did. I'm not sure. Like for me, I didn't feel like that was a good way to have that conversation. So we're kind of going back to it, talking about these two categories. And then there was this article, and we'll get to this toward the probably, I don't know, toward the end, by guy named Ryan Burge, Bergy, as I like to call him. I'll put a link, I'll put a link to the article in the show notes, but it's called "My Church is Closing and I Don't Know What Comes Next for Me or America."
Hmm.
Um, so that's what we're going to talk about today on Two Pastors Talk, and we're going to make this season two, episode one, um, of our podcast. So that'll be our topic.
Awesome.
Cue musical intro. All right. So people leaving St. James, people leaving Westway. You said, so the question I asked was, do people leave St. James? You said yes. And then I asked for do you have people leave for theological reasons? And you
Yep.
said sometimes.
Hmm.
So talk more about like the sometimes. Like why sometimes?
I mean, it's probably in some ways it's probably easier in the evangelical Protestant world to leave for those reasons more easily in some ways than it is Orthodox because you're kind of if you're Orthodox, probably in a lot of ways if you're Roman Catholic and I would suspect if you're Lutheran or Anglican, where these more confessional or more not even that more for lack of a better word, traditional traditions. That's not a weird way to put it, but the context is such that you're either born into it in a sense and bred into that sort of thing, and you've got a choice to stay. So you've already committed to it, or you've converted into it. So and it's a hard thing to do, and it's particularly in Orthodoxy. Um, the tradition it's difficult. It's Christianity we would say in its fullest, and it's with everything in it. So to leave it for theological reasons typically doesn't happen mostly because you've already committed to it and you see something there that you can't find anywhere else. Now it can
So,
happen. It can
mhm.
happen.
So would it be fair to say, because you have, and we briefly talked about this offline, um, would you say that so I come to you and I say, I want to become Orthodox.
Yeah. Yep.
You're going to, you're going to put me into a catechesis process
Yeah.
where you are going to like we're going to spend time together and you're
Yep.
going to teach me what it looks like to be Orthodox.
Yeah. Hmm.
During that process, do you have people say, you know what, this ain't for me?
Yeah. In fact, that's the time to do it.
Okay.
I truthfully, I've not had maybe more than one or two people do that. One committed very quickly, I think, in an emotional moment. Another one had mental illness. Um, which is, it's good that it's that relatively rare. But like some people will say about the catechetical process being a catechumen in the Orthodox Church, and I would suspect other churches that are like this. Certainly for us, it's like you're auditing the course, and you can do that as
Mm,
long as you need to, as long as the priest thinks you need to do it. And I think we were talking in that last session that we aren't going to air. Historically, this process, like in the ancient times, would be up to 3 years of work towards it because they wanted to make sure you knew what you were doing. They wanted to pump out all the bilge that accumulated because you were a pagan who, you know, I mean, pardon me, would have sex with anything that moved, and you would go sacrifice to idols, and you did all these horrible things. And then you became a Christian. You had to learn, like, oh, these aren't normal. Like, people didn't
right.
know. That's
Right.
the crazy. And we're getting back to those days, I think. So, it's a process. And I tell people, like, this is, better to say, I don't want this than to reject something, like to join it and then reject it, having, like, that's the whole difference. I'll
Sure.
interject something here. You asked me if people leave. I've got a classmate from seminary who was a priest who I will not mention his name because I don't want to give him any more press, who's left and really said a lot of really negative and super inaccurate things,
Mm,
massively inaccurate things about the Orthodox Church. His situation is far different than someone else who is not Orthodox, who disagrees with Orthodoxy, but has never been a part of this thing.
sure.
So for him, that's apostasy. He's done something that's really, we would say, is a terrible thing. But for others, especially those who come to the Orthodox Church, we recognize the fact that even though we think they should follow through with it, they may not. And if they don't, that's the time to do it, to step away from it.
Right. Well, okay, yeah, and I think that even like adds even more clarity for me. Like this, I'm glad we're revisiting this topic because this
Yeah.
that provides a lot more clarity for me of yeah, I can see why. So one of the things we said before we like went live on this was regardless of regardless of what our differences are in the way that like at the bottom line in the way that we do things as churches and I really like the way you said this, we both want people who are involved and engaged in the life of the church,
Yeah.
like that's their thing
Yeah.
is Christ is first, being a part of his body is a part of that. So regardless of the way we do things, like it is the desire of both of us as Christians, as Christian leaders, as pastors, to for people to be involved and engaged in the life of the church, committed 100%.
Yeah.
So then by that rationale, now what that looks like, that's where things I think start to differ is I want to become
Yeah.
Orthodox and we're gonna spend time together. And I like the way you describe that, like auditing a class. Like then
Yeah.
there are plenty of times for me to not bow out. But chances are
Yeah.
once someone, whatever the language is, I want to get the language right. Once someone becomes Orthodox, once you accept them
Yeah.
into the church,
Yeah. They
I can
convert. Yeah.
understand why having come through that process, the likelihood that they're going to leave for a theological reason is probably pretty small.
Yeah. Yeah. They should have, unless they've had bad catechesis. Like I said, there's
That
other
does that ever
reasons to
happen?
leave. Well, I
Does that
mean,
ever happen?
it gets us into deeper issues, and it's probably an
Yeah.
issue across the board. Like, what does it mean to become, like I was just sitting here, one of the differences is, I would suspect, when I grew up in the CMA, Christian Missionary Alliance Church, evangelical church, the people would visit the church who were, obviously we would categorize as unsaved. And then they would, through evangelism, or they would make a decision for Christ. And then that would be something that would lead to the next stage. But that was sort of like, that was the end, right? Okay. And it's probably similar where for you and your thing, you're in your paradigm. In the Orthodox Church, um, as scandalous as it might seem to evangelicals, we don't have any of that. We have people come to Christ by coming to Christ. And in the process of this, they then are, invited into this thing into a deeper way. And in this, the things that mark that, like we would say, indelibly mark this are baptism, And then, of course, we follow that up with something called chrismation. So it's an anointing. And then participating in communion, which we see as, an exalted thing, participating in the sacrament of confession, all the sacraments, that they're not just marks or whatever you want to call them. They are, um, it's what the life of a Christian is.
Yeah,
So there isn't a point at which I can go and say I was, I wouldn't say that as an Orthodox Christian, I wouldn't say I was saved on XYZ or day. I would just say this is when I was received into the church, um, recognizing the fact that Christ is already at work, that I have, chosen to follow that, and that so there are different markers where
sure.
we are. So then again, that adds to the complexity of the differences, I think, between the two. Then again, the similarities are there. People come, people can go. If we're giving them in any paradigm, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, which it means you're not a Christian if you are, because that's not how it works. But whatever thing it is you're going to go into, the Moose Lodge, there's going to be a set of teachings, and you're going to have to say, well, I will follow these teachings to stay a part of this thing. You're going to have those things. So if the better you educate a person, I guess is how you would say it, the less chance that later they'll be like, well, I didn't know this, or I don't like this. I mean, that's just normal. I think with
Sure.
the church, it takes an extra, it's an extra layer, because you're not dealing with, like, again, a club. You're dealing with a heart change, a life change. So it's something different, but
Hmm.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, I know, and this was, I don't know, this was my story too. I remember when we were coming to Christ, like we just heard things that we were just like, man, how come we never heard this before?
Mhm.
And where did that come from? And that's very generic and very general.
I know what you mean, though.
Um, but that's something that we see. Like there's just yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of, I you'll love this next thing. Like there's a lot of bad teaching out there, and you're like, yeah, there is.
Well,
There
I
is,
mean,
John. We should talk about that. Uh,
well, even within the
I
Orthodox
have some
Church,
thoughts. I have some
yeah, I
thoughts.
have many
That's your
thoughts.
that's your
I have
favorite.
many
I have
thoughts. I
many
have many
thoughts,
thoughts.
John. There is some bad teaching out there. Um, so yeah, I would say for us, um, I would also say, like I said at the beginning, like we, as far as I know, we rarely have. I don't know that I've ever had someone come up to me and say, I'm leaving because this
Hmm.
theological thing. Um, I would say the two, we've talked about this before. I mean, our two doctrinal distinctives in our world, in the Protestant slash evangelical world, our two doctrinal distinctives would be baptism by immersion and then communion on a weekly basis. And I've never had anyone come to me and say, I can no longer come to this church because you baptize by immersion or you take communion, you participate in communion every week. Like
Mm,
I've never had
right,
anyone say that.
right.
Um, Usually when I do hear about when someone does tell me that they're leaving, which is rare, um, there's it like everything, it's just like it's that whole other category.
Yep.
Um, so someone says they're leaving for a theological reason to you. Um, like, and it's not a brief answer, but I'm going to say, because I know we want to talk about this article, I'll say briefly, like, how would you, hey, here's this theological thing. You pick the topic. Like, I'm going to go to a Protestant slash evangelical church,
Mhm.
or like, how would you not, like, depending on topic dependent, like how
Sure.
how would you how would you kind of navigate that with someone?
Probably poorly. Mostly because of my own weakness. I mean, this has happened for us. I mean, it's happened where we've had people who've been I mean, the way we talk about an orthodoxy, it's we would say they've been Orthodox for years and years, that in some cases, and in one case in particular, where and they'll never listen to this. So I don't really, even if they did, it wouldn't bother me because I've told them how I feel about it. Um, it's it's so intrinsic to Orthodox Christians, like what we confess and what we believe, that to leave it, we still want to love those people regardless. But you have to be super blunt and say you realize that what you're doing, what you're saying by this, is a denial of what we believe, and they usually will say, well, yeah, that's why I'm leaving. So sometimes it's ignorant. Sometimes there's just a lot of damage in people. And
Mm,
in the one case that I can think of specifically where this happened, um, someone they left, they decided to go back towards Protestantism. And of course, we have an issue with that because you've been Orthodox for a long time. Um, there's a lot going on there. I try to ask questions like what's happened? Did somebody say something? Did you read something? Have you had
mm,
some emotional, is there something, that's gotten you, have I done something? Usually I start there. Have I done something that's discouraged you or made you think? And, depending on those answers, then the questions follow after that. But if a person chooses to do that and chooses to leave, it's complicated because you don't want to be like the Amish and shun people. That's not what it's about. But St. Paul's pretty direct. Like, if, if our theology means anything, and if people reject the theology that a given church teaches, then it seems like, I would say, certainly from the Orthodox perspective, that St. Paul's like, I wouldn't even eat with such a person. The whole
mm.
point is for the sake of their repentance. Like they see the seriousness of this. I don't honestly, I don't know exactly what to do with that. When it happened in our own parish, those people kept strong ties with people, still have strong ties with people in our parish. It leads to a lot of confusion. I've talked to
Mm,
people in our parish about that to say, don't treat them badly, but they have to understand there's a difference in the relationship when
mm.
that something so central to who you are, because either we're serious about our faith and it's so central to us. I mean, think about the book of Acts. You had two people lie about property they sold, okay? Which on our, like today, would be like, well, so what? They lie to the Holy Spirit. They dropped dead in the process of doing this. It was just instant judgment. However that works. I mean, it's kind of breathtaking when you think about that. There's a seriousness to what we do. Not that God's holding like an axe over us, but that when people theologically walk away,
Mm.
denying the core reality, is super serious. Now, let me take a few steps back and go to where my life before the Orthodox Church. People in my evangelical church, there was a difference over Calvinism and Arminianism. It was a big issue, and there were people who left the church over that. But the difference, I think, was that there was not really a foot to stand on. People were just allowed to believe what they wanted to believe, even though those two things really kind of radically differ from each other. Um, and in those cases, it was like, well, I'm leaving because you preach this and I believe this over here. There's something different going on there than what I'm talking about. Um, but it's all very difficult. I mean, when people leave, it's just difficult. If we preach and believe and confess something that it's not just me like, oh, I believe this personally, but you can believe whatever. In the Orthodox Church, we have the creed. It's like this is the belief. If you can't confess this, you're not a Christian, first of all. And second of all, in our church, there's problems. Like if for an Orthodox Christian to say, well, I can't confess, I can't read, I can't say the creed anymore. What does that mean? I won't, I don't like this book of the Bible anymore. Well, what does that mean? So they're big issues. And if we're serious about it, then we have to be serious when we encounter them with love, but with serious, probably pastoral discipline, even in some cases.
Sure.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? I don't know if I'm even
Yeah,
answering.
it does. Because I mean, really, yeah,
It's a little different in this paradigm.
yeah.
This is where the differences show. Like
Well,
we have,
it is,
you
it
know,
isn't, it is, and it isn't because I think, okay,
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, cool. Um,
The paradigm.
The paradigm. I think what we're both so someone probably so you would view someone leaving orthodoxy. You can correct me. Would you view someone leaving orthodoxy as leaving Christianity? And like let's say they were leaving orthodox and you man you can say yes. It's totally like we're
No,
good.
I'm trying to
Like
think this through.
no, I like because I think someone leaving the faith is one category.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone leaving for a theological reason, depending on what that theological reason is, could be a different category. Is that
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, I hear what you're saying, and I think too, it's the answer is yes, and the answer is no, in the sense that yes, if the Orthodox Church is the fullness of the faith, regardless of everyone else who's never become Orthodox, we're not talking about you, my parents, Katie, my wife's parents, our family. Any of those people are out of this discussion. For anyone who's come in, who's tasted of, how's the verse go? Who's tasted of I'm trying to think how the verse goes. The idea of like they've participated in this life and then they've
yeah,
rejected it. You know
yeah,
what I'm talking about?
yeah, that's like
We could, you,
Some one of the Peters.
yeah, exactly. And so the idea is we would see it in that sort of idea. Then if they've walked away from this, to leave, let's say they leave and go to your church, at which point I'd be like, well, at least I know the pastor, um, you are doing one thing in that church versus like what my leavers would do coming to you. They'd be doing something totally different in my mind.
Right.
You're in a journey in some sense is a forward moving journey. People who really come into orthodoxy I mean, again, it's like it's up to the Lord to know their hearts. Who then say, who especially in my mind, I'm thinking of the particular case I'm thinking of with these people that have been in for a long time, who sadly, a long time, who should know better, who sadly walk away from it. They are, well, let's say it this way, let's be charitable. They're playing games with their soul. What is the
Mhm.
Top Gun line? They're writing checks with their soul. They're writing checks with their life that their soul can't cash or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah.
That's what I would say. Now, what what you're asking, I'm watching our timer here too. What you're asking is more about salvation versus
Yeah.
like an affiliate, like being like, so what does it mean to even be a Christian? And we're having a discussion where even that becomes a tricky subject. So, I mean, everyone has the possibility of repentance. So if you walk away from, I mean, there was a time where the whole church was, in essence, what we would call the Orthodox Church. It was just one church. It was just one church. There was nobody else. And there were people who, during the persecution, recanted of their faith, and there was a great debate and heresies that were sprung up and rebutted about how you deal with the people who left, but then wanted to come back.
Mhm.
And there was usually some in the early days of the church to become a Christian, you had to write out, I think it was called a libellus, the idea that you would testify that you were becoming, you were saying, I'm becoming this Christian, I'm putting aside these things. You'd have to renounce the past. And so when these people would return from their apostasy, like from fleeing the church in persecution, there was a process for bringing them back into the fold. So there is inherently something in it. Like the yes part is, if you become Orthodox and let's just say you had enough time to know better and you choose to leave, it's hard to see you as a Christian if you're rejecting the things that we say are necessary for a Christian. Now you can walk a fine line there. Everyone else to me is in the mode of moving towards what we call the church. But those who are moving away from it, like my friend who I went to school with, who I won't name, is he even a Christian anymore? He's a pastor of a church. He proclaims Christ and he declaims orthodoxy. So to me, you could do that and you would be in a totally different position than he is doing what he's doing, if that makes some sense. We would see there's different shades here. Mm-hmm. There are Orthodox Christians, though, John, that would look at you and say, well, you're not Orthodox, therefore you're not a part of the church. We don't, I don't think that's what Orthodoxy teaches. I don't think it's not addressing that issue specifically. But it's also
Mhm.
not to say that, like I said, I've been open, there's something to being Orthodox and there's a difference between being Orthodox and other things.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
important. I think that
yeah,
applies. I want to bring it back to you. I think that applies. I think we're trying to find common ground, but also common ground in experience of how we deal with people just simply on the basis of who Christ is. Even if we do
yeah,
this differently, we're walking away from that.
yeah. Recognizing all of those things. If I mean, I think the certainly the point of agreement is if someone left was like communicated, hey, I want to leave one of our churches. Here's the theological reason. Um, we're gonna spend time trying to work through that.
So I would say this. I think the thought would be better be like I mentioned. I'm still conscious of the time here. Um, rather, I mentioned Calvinism and Arminianism. While there's really huge, the Orthodox Church has problems with both of them, but while there are inherent problems within them, I think it's safe to say that there's a confession of Christ as Savior. We would have problems with some of the way that's done. So that's not really the issue. The bigger issue would be setting a bar to say, like, where's the line where someone has truly, left the ranch, and they're probably similar bars to there goes a thumbs up thing again. They are, why does it keep
I
doing that?
saw I saw the little bubbles going up, so I
So
preemptively smiled.
that's good. Um, it's where I think that's probably the real question is like at what point is a person certainly for sure no longer a Christian? And I would say, when someone recants the faith altogether, denies the resurrection of Christ, like for us,
Mhm.
it'd be the creed, denying the aspects of the creed that we say are essential, to Christianity. If someone denies the Trinity, they're not a Christian. You can't be a Christian without that kind of thing.
So before we take our break here in a second,
Yeah.
is it safe to say that there are you brought up Calvinism and Arminianism. Would you say in Orthodoxy that there are less shades of what of how to look at things than there would be in evangelicalism or Protestantism?
When it comes to Christ, the cross, salvation, the Trinity, um, what you would call the ordinance is what we call the sacraments. There's no shades. It's just
Sure.
the truth and nothing else. And so that's which is why a lot of people convert, And I would say for myself very briefly, like, when I encountered Calvinism and Arminianism really battled out when I was really unfamiliar with them, it disturbed me to see so much division about the most essential thing, which is our salvation, being kicked around back and forth. I still find it disturbing,
Mhm.
which is why I'm Orthodox, or partly why.
Okay.
Okay,
So
you want to
hey,
stop?
so we're gonna take a break. We're gonna stop right there, and then we're gonna come back and we'll talk about the other side of the why people leave churches, and um, and then we'll hit that article. So
Yeah.
we're gonna take a quick break for our sponsor, whom we do not have, and then we'll be back shortly.
Okay.
All right, so we do need break music. It's
Yeah.
post break time. We're back from our break. We're back from our preemptive. I don't know what app just happened. Anyway, we're back. So when I came back on here, tell me about the email you just told me you just got.
So I just mentioned this to John during the break. That while we took the break and we were talking about church stuff, I've gotten an email recently from an Armenian Orthodox couple, and just very briefly, I'm a part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Armenians, the Coptics, the Melankara Orthodox, and some others are part of what's called the Oriental Orthodox Church. The Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox have a long, long history, and it's been marked by a schism that started 1,500 years ago, which we're working through still, which is Orthodox time. 1,500 years is nothing. So, if the Armenians or the Coptics or the Ethiopian Orthodox, fascinating people, deep, deep, good traditions. The Coptics, great traditions, but we're not in communion. We can't take communion together technically because of our differences theologically, though that's changing a lot. So when someone like this writes me, I have to say, yeah, well, we'd love to have you here. Realize, we ought to talk about some of these differences before you come to the chalice, before you come to communion, because communion implies union, it implies we believe the same things. Let's talk about that before that happens. So there you go.
Okay, I love it. So that's the no. I don't know. I don't know what generation I'm about to enter into. That would be the no shade. Like there's no shade in that. Like
Yeah.
there's no
Yep.
nuance.
Yeah.
That's an area of no nuance.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I shared this with you before. Like I think one of my favorite things about this is it continues, which is in your back of your mind. I'm going to expect you to do this. um, like I, it's doing exactly what you want to have happen. Is like it just forces me to think about I have to think through my paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there you go. There's your little thing. Like it's happening exactly as you want it to. I'm forced to think through my paradigm because for us, I mean, we as a church that practices communion every week,
Yep.
we call that open communion.
Yep.
We practice open communion, and um, we would say if you're a follower of Christ, then this is for you. And
Yeah.
anyway, we're not. This isn't my counseling session, so
And I
or
agree.
my yeah.
I grew up with the same tradition, I really. And in a way, if you look at the Orthodox, we don't do this often. I do this sometimes. I'll say before we take communion, it's always, the culmination of our liturgy. We had one this morning. So it's Thursday morning, August. Can I say it? What day it is? I'll say it because we're going to do these asynchronously.
This is going to be this is going to be pretty quick. This is probably going to be out on Monday.
Yeah. So I'll say it now. It's August 15th today. There may be other podcasts that we did previously that we're going to do after this.
Yeah.
We served the Divine Liturgy this morning at 7 a.m. It's for the Feast of the Dormition of the Theotokos. It's amazing. Lots of stuff going on there. And I said that to say at the end of it, we have communion. But, sometimes on Sundays, I'll say when we have visitors, communion in the Orthodox Church is reserved for Orthodox Christians who have prepared themselves through fasting and recent confession to receive communion because it's the apex of everything. And it's up to them really after that. I mean, if I don't know the person and they say, yeah, I'm Orthodox, well, where do you go to church? I go to such and such. It's between them and God at that point. If they want to receive
Sure.
communion, because communion, St. Paul says, it's a beautiful, dangerous thing because, and this is the core of this. If people can get sick and die from it, which is what the scripture says can happen
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
approaching it improperly, then it behooves us to know what we're doing when we come to it. So yeah, it's a big deal. And I do think that's part of where the differences lie in the sense of
Yeah.
saying, it's not trying to keep people away from communion. It's just trying to help people to approach things the way they ought to and not do so casually.
Sure.
Again, I'm trying to figure out where that common bar is where, so we want to get to that article. So I don't want to keep talking about this.
Yeah. Okay. So we just talked about before the break. We talked about someone leaves for theological reasons, and that's a spectrum. There's going to at some point conversation, discussion, et cetera, et cetera. That might be I'm leaving because I'm no longer a Christian. It might be because I don't believe this thing that the church teaches or your church, which I'm really uncomfortable with that language.
Yeah.
I know what people mean by that, but
Yeah.
I'm like really uncomfortable with that. So there's that category, and then there's the other category, which is, um, do people leave the church? Like, why do people leave the church for non-theological reasons? And I think we talked about this kind of toward the end of last season. The categories that we found helpful that we've been utilizing here are the categories of preference, conviction, and essentials. So like there's this spectrum of these things, and it's been my experience, and I don't know that I'm incorrect. The vast majority of people who leave who have left Westway Christian Church are over conviction and preference issues and not essentials for us. Would you say that that's like, does that ring true for?
Yeah, I mean, we don't, I wouldn't, and I would say I don't think we treat, I think our tradition's different the way we treat it. So I don't think you can put it in the same categories. There are categories are more like what we would call small T tradition and large T tradition, and then
Okay.
anything outside of that. So for us, if people leave St. James, typically it's not, typically, thank God, it's not theological. It may be a heart issue, but it's probably more personality issues,
Yeah.
or um, maybe for you, like you said, it's the lesser categories where they can't let go of something. Like like you said, there's differences in Orthodox churches too, in the sense that we have ethnic differences. So we have Greek churches who chant a specific way, and our church we tend
Mhm.
to sing things more. You've got differences like from pastor to pastor. Like some of them are well, I won't. I'll be careful because I want to judge myself. But or maybe I should. They're just not very good at what they do. And people are not like. I mean, there are plenty of people you can ordain to a priest, and they can serve as an Orthodox priest adequately, and they're just personalities are just terrible. And people may not be able to put up with that.
Well,
So there's
but
reasons like that.
they might not be good at what they do. Like that may be true,
Hmm.
but that also might be you're not you're not good at what you do in the way that I think you ought to be good at what you do.
Yes. Yes.
So
Which. Yeah.
whatever
Yep.
there.
Yeah. No.
Yeah,
So
and I just
yeah, to agree, I would say I would agree. Generally, I would agree exactly with what you said, your initial statement. So I should have just shortened that and said, yeah, I generally agree with that.
well, I think the key in this is um and I asked you this question beforehand. Um, if someone were to come to you and say, I'm leaving for this Orthodox church across town because like like regardless of the capital O in your Orthodox and it's Eastern Orthodox, if there are two Eastern Orthodox churches and let's say they were right across the street from each other, each one of them is going to have its own culture.
Yeah.
Like
Like
regardless
family
of
life. Yeah.
yeah, 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 thank you. It's going to have a different and there are people who are going to like who may not be down with the St. James culture, but they're down with that culture.
Yep.
Um, and how much time in that situation, like how much time are you gonna? I didn't mean to like I glibly smirked and shook my head in that situation, which 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 completely gives away
Your
my bent.
answer.
So maybe I'll just put a black screen up there so no one can see that. Um, I'll tell you. I'll just answer. I'll answer the question for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Please do.
I'm my bent is to if when I'm in conversation with people, and this is where I think this is the place where I didn't like when we talked about this before. Like we didn't have this distinction. I didn't make clear this distinction in the way I was responding. Um, my bent is if it is more on that preference, if it's like if that were a continuum with preference here, essentials here, convictions in the middle, if it's more toward like that preference side of things, I'm bummed when people leave, and I'm not sure how much time, effort, and energy I'm going to put into changing someone's preference
Yep.
because right or wrong, I've just not seen that work.
Yeah.
Um, I had a conversation with someone even a few weeks ago who about this topic who said to me, when people decide to leave a church, like they've already made that decision.
Yeah. Yep.
So and that's been a product of choices. And I just like when I've gone after people on preferential and even some convictional issues. Like it seems like it's a band-aid,
Yeah. Yep.
but I feel like mentally and emotionally, like once people have made that decision to go, like they're done.
Yep.
And I like I hate that. It hurts. It frustrates me. And if so, and this is where I think this goes back to what we did talk about quite a bit last time.
Yeah.
If someone in the midst of that were to say to me, I'm going to go to this church in Scottsbluff or that church in Scottsbluff or that church in Gearing, my response 99.9% of the time is, do you want to talk about it? If not, man, I hope you will go there and be an involved and engaged
Yep.
member of that church. Like if that's like, and I think sometimes people want more effort than that.
Yep.
Um, but on that preference side, like I'm just not sure that I have it. I'm not sure that I have it in me to enter into all of that because there's lots of reasons people leave a church. And when it comes down to preferential issues, and I think this goes back to that cultural piece, um, I can only be who I am.
Yeah. Yep. How
I
many
can
times have
only
I said that? Yeah, I've said the same thing. You know?
right. I can only preach and teach. That doesn't mean I don't want to be better. It doesn't mean I don't put forth effort in
Mhm.
doing things differently.
Right.
But I can only do things in the way that I'm in the way that God has gifted me. And I can't we talked about this when we talked about preaching. My bent is expositional preaching. Like I just can't topically preach
Yeah.
for long. We get 3 weeks into a 4 or 5 week topical series, and I'm like ready to go nuts. I'm like, oh, man, I can't do this
Yeah.
anymore. I need to get back to the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
Um, so now that we've like I think I said the same thing I said in the video that we're not going to share, but
It makes more sense.
now that I've delineated it, hopefully the people who are going to watch this aren't going to come away with maybe the same like with the same like gut reaction that John doesn't care if people
Yeah.
leave, because I mean
Yep.
it's not true. I do care greatly. It just means if someone is leaving over a preference issue, um, I'm gonna look at the camera directly. Like
Yeah.
I love you and I care about you, and if you're leaving over a preference issue, but you're going to another church where you're going to hear the gospel proclaimed, I'm going to let you go.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm going to
Yeah.
look back at you now because
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
down there.
Yeah.
So thoughts, comments, questions, and then we're going to jump into this Burge article.
Yeah, and I agree. I would agree. I mean, for me, the two issues would be where are you going to go? Not that it matters if they're
Mm,
leaving; that's their choice.
mm,
Um, I don't want you. You know, I'll advise a person. You know, if they're an Orthodox Christian, I'll say you need to stay in the
mm,
church. Go hopping around. But like you said, and I've said the same exact thing. I can't. I can only be what I am. I have a lovely one of my best pals. You know, at church. Um, likes to tell me about this priest or that priest and how good they are at this or that. And you should try this. They do this. I'm like, I hate that. I don't want to do it. And it's not who I am. And
right.
I'm not going to do it. I lament the fact that I'm not an extrovert. I
Mm,
love watching extroverted priests. They just Monday rolls around and they're weeping because they're not with their people. And Monday rolls around for me. I'm like, just give me my lawnmower and some earplugs. And I can go by myself somewhere and I can recover from the people time on Sunday. You can only be what you are, like you said. And I think you're right. I think there was one of our priests, Father Stephen Freeman, who has a really great blog. I think was it called Glory to God or Glory to God for All Things? It's really great. But I remember talking to him about this too. And he said, you know, don't, don't chase people. I
mm,
mean, if they, like you said, if they're determined to leave, let them go. You can warn them if they're going down the wrong road, spiritually, if they're leaving just because, like you said, things like the minutia that you can't fix for them. Like you said, it's a band-aid. I've done this where I've tried to like adapt for somebody else. I still do it in some ways. I'll keep trying it. I like maybe it'll fix it this time. And it doesn't. And there's all you can do. What are you going to do? That's not something you can control. That's on their heads, really, at that point.
Yeah. Would you say that you have like would you would you say that you have a people pleasing tendency?
Oh, totally. Totally. I fight it all the time.
Mm,
And when I have to confront somebody, I actually have that. I'm an angry person by nature,
mm,
so it's like I'm ready for the fight, and as soon as it starts, I don't like what I see, and so I immediately kind of run away from it because I
mm.
don't want to do something. I don't want to either be a people pleaser or somebody that easily can jump to I'm the priest. As soon as you say I'm the priest, you're not in charge anymore.
Right,
So I
right.
never say that. I just say
Yeah.
okay, all right, then we'll try it your way, and we'll see how things go. Maybe I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Or if I have to, I'll just say, well, we've got to do it this way. But yeah, I mean, you asked me that for a reason. Why do you ask that?
Well, because I think like as much as I would love to think I'm not a people pleaser, like I am. I have that
Yeah,
tendency is very much in there.
yeah.
And um that it is hard, it really is hard to deal with that
Oh,
as a person who leads anything, certainly as a person who leads in a church and serves in a church, to fight that people pleasing tendency because when I hear those those things on this side of the spectrum, like part of me like wants to try and fix that. My one of my dysfunctions is information. I feel like the more information someone, like if they just had the right information,
yes.
they would see it my way, and
Yep.
that is such a freaking dysfunction of mine,
Yeah.
um, I really have to work at pushing against,
Yep.
because sometimes like it's not enough information. It's not the information,
Yeah.
um, because that puts me and the dysfunction, and that is I'm in the driver's seat.
Mm,
Then I'm the one who has control over this, and I like. I mean, another that's another one of mine. Like, I man, I love. I have always liked being in control, and I just got to
yep.
so much push against that.
Yep.
Um, so anyway, like I said earlier, this is not my counseling session. Okay,
It's mine.
so
Uh,
there is so we'll post the link to this, but there's this recent article by a guy named Ryan Burge, who is um, like I one of the things I love about the article. Like we'll post the link to it
right.
here, but
I'm
like he's
staring at it
a
over here.
yeah he's the same like he's a somebody. He
Yep.
started making charts and graphs, as the article will say, and like kind of like his personal platform grew. And in the meantime, the church he was leading in Illinois was dying, was closing, was going away. Um, so this article, um, you brought it up. Um,
Hmm.
what? So what do you want to talk about from this?
I have many thoughts. I mean, from the Orthodox perspective, we suffer, I would say this. I would say one thing right out of the gate. One of the things I always have to think about is like, I do not want to point fingers at a pastor suffering from
Mm,
this sort of thing. Um, and I should have said this earlier. There's a difference between being a pastor and a priest. The two overlap, but that's just a side note. But I don't want to point fingers at him and say, if only he had done, so I'm looking at this
mm,
article, I'm looking at him sitting there in his little seat in the article. Um, I think that every church has its lifespan. It's just some lifespans can be centuries. I mean, can be centuries and centuries. I mean, heck, all the churches, I think all the churches mentioned in the book of Revelation, the places are still there, but the churches are gone.
mm-hmm,
So everything has, interestingly enough, in the Orthodox Church, we have bishops of those churches, even though the
mm,
cities are gone, interestingly enough, but of those places. So that was kind of the first thing, was just there is a lifespan to a church.
mm,
But I think the lifespan, it's like there may be a lifespan, but the problem we're facing, it's probably not a new one. It just feels new in America, particularly because that's what the article gets after, is one that, if a church is dying, then this is whatever this problem is in America is like speeding into, it's like giving it cancer, and making it worse, which is, I think COVID really exacerbated or
mm,
actually maybe revealed. I think he says this in the article. It kind of reveals the weakness of the nature of how Christians, and I would say this, I can't say this so much for Orthodox. I would say certainly in the evangelical Protestant world right now are thinking of church. Orthodoxy is got some of that going on. It's different than what he's dealing with. But still, when you see something like this as a pastor, it's still very sobering. It doesn't matter who you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's why that was probably another reason why I wanted to and it's just now kind of coming to me like it's been rolling around in my head. There's another reason why I wanted to redo what we did a few weeks ago and then talk about this because this really does get as I was reading it, you said it, I'm going to paraphrase it. This article really does deal with what do we think the church is?
Mm.
What is the church for? What is the church about? Who is the church? I saw the thing on one of the quotes, I've heard this quote 1,000 times: "Light yourself on fire, and people will come, to watch you burn." Um, and obviously, that's about passion and some notes that I wrote down. Like, do people want passion? What is passion? I think that plays into the conversation that you and I had at the end of that last part of like we can only be who we can be.
Yeah.
I've There have been times when like I've been working on a message and I think, oh, this will be like I kind of had like kind of had a scene played on my head of
Yeah.
how I thought like that was going to go, like how that was going to be delivered or whatever. And then like when I'm done, I'm like, oh, like it wasn't like that at all. Like
Yeah.
I envisioned myself being more, I don't know, passionate, compelling, and
Mm.
I'm just not like I know I understand what he's getting at, but I just was like, I don't know, like I don't know if people want like that might not be me, that might not be you, like that might
Yeah.
not be our personality. So that was a thought, and then another thing I thought was they like it seemed like the perspective of when he was hired, the perspective of the church was like he was going to be the one that turned it around,
Uh,
kind of a thing. And I think like we've been talking about First Corinthians here for the last 11 months, and like man, that's the whole story of First
yeah.
Corinthians is, especially at the end, you get to chapter 16 and come to find out like Apollos doesn't want to go back because I think like the things I read, essentially Apollos doesn't want to, is not ready to go back because he knows that they think he's the best speaker, and
Mm.
for him to insert himself back into that dysfunction is only going to make it worse. So
Yeah.
Paul's like, Apollos isn't coming, so I'm going to send Timothy. Like
Yeah.
I'm going to send probably the youngest, the newest guy, like you don't want.
Yeah.
And I think there are lots of churches that function in that place of like, if if we just had Apollos, if we just had this, if we just had this musical style or whatever, like all of our problems would be solved.
Yeah.
And and I think who turns the church, I think the answer to who turns the church around is the like A, Jesus, but B, like the church does.
Yeah. Yeah. We call that synergy. I mean, we would say that's synergy. We
Hmm.
work with God, and that's something that's in orthodoxy. You don't get away from it. I mean, God. So the first step is everything God does, He does using us to do it. I mean, with the exception of saying, well, I mean, we're a part of it, but He makes life. He makes the grain, but we have to take it and make bread from it. He makes the grapes,
Mm.
and He gives us rain, but we have to make that. We have to take that and make wine out of it. We use this for communion, the same image. But I think you're totally right. I think that there's a term, I don't know what it is, and I think it's in Russian, because our church has Russian roots, or at least Slavic roots, you might say. And they talk about churches where they go through a lot of priests, and you see the same thing in any church. A lot of pastors, they call them priest eaters, like they just
Mm-hmm.
keep consuming them, and they get tired of them, they spit them out and go. They get another one because they're convinced. somehow they get the right person. But the problem has always been the people. It's never the priests because they keep changing priests. So
Right.
yeah, and a side note to this too, my home parish in Toccoa, St. Timothy's, we didn't have a priest when I became Orthodox. We didn't have a full-time priest. We had a priest that would come in. I think Father Jacob came twice a month, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time. I've mentioned it. My parish knows all about this, but he would come in and serve the services for us twice a month. We would be able to take communion, serve the liturgy together. But the other days of the month that we would meet, we would do in Orthodox terms what would be called reader services or lay services, which you see that in evangelical world too. Probably more so in a sense than what you see with us. Our services revolve around ordained people to do them, but we had to do that without a. We couldn't do the communion service without a priest. You have to have a priest there to do that, which is fine. That's why they send them. But there's no excuse to not serve a service, so we would do reader services. So we really, at least this is my experience of St. Timothy's. My friends, I think, would agree with it who were there. We really had to learn how to function as a church, minus a full-time shepherd to guide us through the things. And then we also had to prepare for the fact eventually we would get one. And how do we sort of reintegrate to where he becomes that leadership role? Well, it just so happened for us that Father Jacob, who was what we call our supply priest, became our full-time priest. So that was good. For us, at least. I mean, for him, it was more of a trial and difficult because we were difficult. But yeah, it's the people. I mean, it's always the people. And I think, for this guy, I'm looking at the article, to sort of they'd say, you're going to come in and change. I mean, it's possible, but most of us, 99.99999% of us as pastors are not, some personality. And I think, thank God for that. We don't need more
Yeah.
celebrity pastors,
Mm.
but that's what I think people think they want that.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing that obviously going, I'm going to sound like, I don't mean to sound like the way I'm about to sound. So I'm not sounding like this, but it is easy for people to go to. I mean, we certainly, I think, wrestle through this.
Mm.
Is you can go on YouTube and you can see what other people are doing, and it can be very easy to fall into that space of,
Oh yeah.
man, pastor like that would,
Yeah.
speaker like that would, um, and I think you're right. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
I think there are certain personalities that can, well, everyone has their own gift. Like that's Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12.
Hmm.
There are like different leaders have different gifts, and some of those gifts are people who can catalyze and equip and encourage and lead the church to a place. Um, and the church has to be willing to go to that place. I mean, the body has a responsibility, which circles back to what we said at the beginning of this little segment here. Is, man, people. This is my heart for people, is people who don't grasp the real purpose of the church.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand that, like, I don't know that that's I'm not sure that that is the it's not the foundation, because Christ is our foundation. But man, that's pretty, like, the purpose of the church is pretty low on the building. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a part of it. It's a place that, it has its role. I mean, I'm really quick to not push back, but sort of push sideways to say, don't forget about that space. But,
Yeah.
I mean, even for the Orthodox, we can go celebrate a liturgy in a tent. We've done it. You can do it all the time if you have to. You can celebrate. I've celebrated the liturgy in my home when the air conditioner went out in our church, and we just invited everybody to our house, and we had to have liturgy somewhere. So we celebrated the divine liturgy on a Sunday. I see the timers up here too. And you can do that. But yeah, I mean, And I do wonder too. One of the key things when I decided I was going to follow the path into the Orthodox Church was actually, trying to answer the question, what is the church? Which is,
Mhm.
it's like seems so foundational and so basic, but I think it's probably merits its own discussion. But that's, I mean, really getting to the brass tacks. You get down below the level of paint on that one, and you know and I do think, I wonder sometimes. I mean, in this discussion, even maybe we need one more part in here. Maybe we need to come back, one more break, and then come back from the break or something. It's up to you. But are we, like I said, we talk about participation in the life of the church. It's a living, it's a living reality, this body of Christ. It's not an idea or a concept. It is that, but it's far more than just an idea or a concept. It's the union of of people with, like, the union with people with God, making them what they were made to be in the beginning. And then also by doing that, uniting them to one another at a deep spiritual level. Um, but I think for most people, I mean, and if we're honest with ourselves, if I'm honest with myself, maybe for myself even, that it's sort of, I never dive deep enough into it. I still, as much as I want to do it, I go down and I sort of float back up into the layer where it's more a community, a social community, even though really it's like, I think if I can just stop judging people or growing impatient with my people, if I could really learn to love the people in my parish, then it's going to be a lot deeper. Like, it's going to be more like what Christ has with these other people around me, and supposedly has with me. If I just let him, then it would be a different thing. I mean, that's the bond. That's really the bond. And we would say that happens, at least for us, it's made visible when we go to communion together. We partake together of the one communion, or when we gather specifically, for the services, like, really. I mean, we have this line, we talk about uniting our hearts in the divine liturgy, the whole idea of bringing together the center of our being with each other. It's not emotional, because certainly, I mean, church can be very frustrating, actually. It's not intellectual, although there are ideas there and there are emotions. It's something that's really kind of even beyond us. It's almost like we can just open up our chests to each other and let God somehow unite those things. So we have to do the part of sort of exposing our heart
Mm.
and let God do the work of bringing us together, which is it's a mystic. We in Orthodoxy, we talk about mysticism, mystical this, mystical that. It's true. It's a mystical thing. It's like kind of beyond us how that works. But if we leave it all at the level of, like, just organization,
Sure.
then it's very easy for people to go from place to place to place and just say, I'll trade this color for this color, or this model for this model. That's no good.
Right.
If any of
One
that
of
makes
the,
sense.
yeah, yeah. One of the other things I thought was interesting was I did you read through the comments at all? Did
I
you look through the
started
comments?
actually, let me go down the bottom. I started to do that.
There was a lot of Mormons in there, which I found kind of fascinating. There's a lot of LDS commentary about essentially, like, they're the church. Like, well, if you are a real church like
Well,
us.
the reason that's Mormons is, and this is what I was saying last time. This is, I think, Deseret, which is what it was. It's not necessarily a Mormon
Hmm.
thing, but it's definitely put out in, I think, Salt Lake City. So you're going to get a lot of Mormon comments. But that's interesting. It actually adds a whole layer to it. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, I just thought that was it. So I'm just okay. I just clicked on Deseret because I wanted to see. Oh yeah, I wonder if this
It,
is
I thought so, because I
Oklahoma
remember.
town. Okay, yeah.
There you go. Yep. Where's it at? Where's it from?
I don't know, but it is a. It looks like it's a Mormon thing. Yeah,
Is it a Mormon thing? Okay.
it
All
is.
right.
Yeah, at the very bottom of their homepage, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
There you go. Well, that would explain it. But it's interesting because you get that perspective, which you wouldn't get anywhere else, really.
Hmm.
I didn't look at these at all, and it would have actually made a lot more sense if I look at
Yeah.
these. But it's a sad. I mean, it's a sad story. The article is a sad story, and you kind of have to wonder. I mean, I look at in the article is a picture of their congregation, I guess, at the end. And it's primarily old folks. There's just a handful of young people. It looks like any number of churches today,
Mm.
and you have to wonder, was this just the end of the life cycle, or did people just stop doing this? They just became reliant on the shepherd. It became a chapel to go to and not a real active living
Mm.
church body.
Well,
Did we get anywhere with that?
I think more questions, more questions than answers, which is, I don't know.
Typical.
I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Well, this is Two Pastors Talk. This will be season 2, episode 1. Um, Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe. We'll be releasing more episodes over the next several weeks, every other week. So we'll be back on that rotation. Um, and I think we will probably like then episode 4, since we've already recorded 2 and 3, and this was 1. Probably episode 4. I don't know. We'll get back to it. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.